Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of We Got Your Mac. I'm Victoria Barber, and today I'm joined by Scott Smith. Now, today's episode of We Got Your Mac is sponsored by Kandji, which means that a couple of days ago, Scott and I sat down with Weldon Dodd, who's the Senior VP of Global Solutions at Kandji.
Yeah, I was really interested to talk to him. He's been working in Apple endpoint management for close to 2 decades, and super smart guy. It was a great conversation.
Now, I know we're going to be talking about WWDC in this conversation, and I also know that this September the 9th event, we're hoping to hear about new iPhones, among other things. Now, when this episode's going out, we're less than a week away from the event.
Yeah, and so something that we touch on also is the rollout phase. And if Apple follows their usual cadence, they have the event coming up on Monday, the 9th. Generally, iOS, iPadOS, watchOS, tvOS, HomePodOS, all of those usually drop the Monday after the event. So we're looking at Monday the 16th for the release of all of those operating systems. Now, macOS is usually different. Last year with Sonoma, it was late September. The previous year with Ventura, it was late October. So macOS, there's still a little bit of breathing room there. But as far as all the other operating systems, we're really close to the rollout phase.
Okay, so a lot of exciting things coming up. So let's go and see what Weldon has to say. It's been a while now since WWDC 2024, but one of the things I think that people forget is it's not just an announcement and then big bang, everything happens. WWDC is forward-looking, future-focused. So, yeah, people have an immediate response to it and lots of stuff comes out. But now we've had some time to think about it. So we wanted to talk to somebody about what Apple admins need to know and what they need to prepare for as a result of these announcements. So today, Scott and I are going to have a conversation about that, and Scott is going to introduce our guest for us.
Yeah, today we have with us Weldon Dodd, who is Senior Vice President of Global Solutions at Kandji. Welcome, Weldon. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having me on, Scott and Victoria.
So just to give us some background as to why you're here and why we and our listeners should be listening to you, can you give us a little bit of background into your experience and your expertise with Apple device deployment?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm excited to talk to you about managing Apple devices and deploying them, because that's where my career started. Just over 30 years ago, I managed a Mac lab and a Next lab at the University of California. And from there, I went into IT. I spent a decade in the wilderness and wireless telecom working on network management systems and things for cell phone carriers in the United States. But then for the last, 15, 18 years, my career has come back to Apple, and I've been focused on Apple endpoint management. I spent a number of years running training for Apple admins with macOS Support Essentials and AppleCare hardware repair and IT training. For a while, I was the lead course developer on Apple Deployment Essentials, which was the MDM course that Apple used to teach people about managing devices and how to control them with MDM. And then I spent a number of years as a contractor working in professional services with Apple and others, helping admins to be successful with very large deployments. It was a great opportunity for me to help some customers with deployments of over 100,000 devices. And through that experience, got exposed to some things I think might be useful for this audience.
So because Apple is generally a consumer-focused company, WWDC usually comes up as consumer-focused. A lot of people just sort of think of it as the keynote. That's where Apple announces all the fun new features that are coming to all the OSs in the fall. Sometimes there are hardware announcements, which we didn't get this year, but that keynote really just kicks off a week of sessions for developers and IT admins to learn about all these new features, but also then kind of kicks off 3 months of pretty intense work getting ready for these releases. And so just to kind of start, we wanted to sort of get your perspective on that beta season and just kind of why it's so important for IT admins and developers to really pay attention during this time.
That first morning when we get the keynote is a really exciting time. I love to watch that as well. We get to see all the end user facing features, and we get a hint or a taste of what's coming behind the scenes. They touch on some information that gets detailed in other sessions later that day. There's the State of the Union address, state of the platform, rather. And then there's another session later in the week that's of particular interest to admins, which is what's new in Apple device management. And that's where we get details about what's happening with declarative device management, other controls that Apple's making available for admins to use as they're making the devices work for corporate use. There's kind of two things that are happening side by side. One is applications that we use at work might be getting updated in order to be ready for the new operating systems in the fall, but also just the base platform itself, the operating system itself might be being updated in ways that admins need to pay attention to.
You've pointed out there's a lot of stuff here for developers. I mean, it's a developer conference after all, despite, the consumer headlines. And there's 3 months then that those developers have to prepare for that operating system to come out. What do they need to do in those 3 months following WWDC? I mean, why might it be a problem for applications if they don't do that?
There's a couple categories of things that developers should consider. And, today, many companies that use Apple devices develop their own applications, either for internal use or for their customers to use. And so this may be something that's already familiar to many of our listeners that are supporting those developers or supporting those efforts. The first category is just making sure that the application as is will continue to run successfully on the new operating system version. What's happening behind the scenes is a number of the shared frameworks and libraries, APIs, platform capabilities are being updated and changed. And sometimes changes get introduced that break things. Right? That something has been modified in a way that it no longer behaves the way that it used to. And so it's just necessary to run the application as is on the beta versions to validate that it continues to work. And there may be changes that need to be worked around or adjusted. There oftentimes are bugs or issues in previous versions that developers have written workarounds for those previous versions to make them work. And then those issues get fixed. And now the developer has to kind of, pull out some of the code they had written to go around it. The opposite, it can be true as well, right? Where something new gets introduced that doesn't work quite right.
I was going to say too, just to touch on that. So talking about WWDC and, kicking off this period of work that needs to be done, it's not even just, okay, here are all the new features. Now go make them work in your apps. There are new beta releases about every 2 weeks for the first couple of months. And then as you get closer, there are new beta releases every week. And so, like you said, I mean, yeah, sometimes they'll push something and then they'll revert with the next one. And then the next one pushes something new. And especially this season, because of Apple Intelligence, everybody's sitting around waiting because they haven't enabled that in the betas yet, but it's coming. So that's something else that you have to kind of be ready for with, this barrage of releases, if you will.
It could be tempting in this environment, in this situation where it is very dynamic, particularly early on in the development process. There are lots of changes. Some things get introduced, they get pulled back, they get reintroduced later. It could be tempting to wait to see what's going to happen. But I think it's really important to share that the most important time to share feedback with Apple during this beta process is early. The earlier you can file feedback and provide your experience with, are things running the way you expect? Is the new macOS version, new iOS version going to work in your corporate environment? The best time to share that is early, because that provides the team that's working on those features more time in order to address an issue that you might have raised. So if there is something not working, telling them early is going to be best.
One of the things that we were talking about a couple of episodes ago was device management for Vision Pro. How are device management capabilities evolving generally?
Apple's been on a journey over the last just couple years to shift from the original mobile device management or MDM protocol to a new declarative device management protocol, or DDM. And there was a number of limitations with the original MDM protocol that have been addressed with this new approach. So one was installing applications. In the original method, an MDM platform like Kandji would send a command to the device saying, please install this application from the App Store. Very kindly, would you do so, please? And then we just had to wait, right? The device would get the command. It would be responsible for reaching out to the App Store and installing that application. But the MDM platform itself would not know if it had been successful or not. What we could do is in a few minutes, we could ask, hey, what applications do you currently have installed? And we would get back a list of all the applications that have been installed. And we would compare, well, I've sent this command to install Microsoft Word a few minutes ago. Is Microsoft Word present on the device? And if it wasn't, well, then maybe it just hasn't happened yet, right? So I'd wait 5 minutes and ask again. Well, it's quite a heavy process just to check to see if an application has been installed. So the key innovation that one of the key innovations that declarative device management has added is a status channel where when a command is sent to say install an application, there is this status channel that's left open so the device can respond and say, you know what, I've got the command, here's the current status, and I'll keep you updated as things change. I will update the status of this action as it progresses, including it's been successfully completed. It's a much lighter process. It relies on pushing information from the device into the status channel instead of constantly polling over and over, which is quite heavy in terms of compute and network traffic.
Yeah.
Apple has introduced this approach a couple years ago. They've made improvements and they've extended the reach of the new DDM approach every year since, and this year is no exception. So there continues to improve. The reach of DDM continues to grow, and it's something, frankly, that we're quite excited about at Kandji because not only does it fit the way that we think about managing devices, but we can see very tangible benefits to our customers.
Yeah, I can imagine it significantly reduces workload and actually significantly reduces stress when you've got critical updates or changes that you want to make and you don't want to have to keep on going and checking when you're trying to get something done in a hurry.
Absolutely.
Kandji is the device management solution for high-growth businesses that run on Apple. IT teams that need to protect and configure Apple device fleets often struggle with legacy systems and complicated workflows. With Kandji's advanced automation, devices are kept secure and in the desired end state without all that extra hassle. Apps are patched, operating systems are updated, and security controls are enforced. Learn why growing companies like Allbirds, Canva, and Notion use Kandji to secure and manage their Apple devices. Try Kandji for yourself at kandji.io. That's KANDJI.io.
Obviously, it's not going to be that long before all of these new features and functionality and this new operating system land, and enterprises, corporates are going to have to deploy the new OS, some updated applications, etc. What are the main areas that IT admins should be focusing on as they prepare for the new OS release?
I think there's at least two key areas. As we talk, I might think of more, right? But the two that I would focus on are, does an existing computer, when it's been updated to a beta version of the Mac OS, does it continue to work as expected? Do the applications that are in use for that person's role, that are have been adopted within the organization? Do all of those continue to work? Can I get access to single sign-on and these other capabilities that we've talked about? Can I still print? Can I still send email? Can I still log into the tools that I need to use to do my job? That's one category. Can I take an existing computer that's working, upgrade to the new operating system, and do things continue to work? That's one. The second one is, can I take a brand new computer that's fresh out of the box with the new version of Mac OS on it, and can I run my same deployment workflow to get that computer set up for a colleague? Will it install correctly? Will it enroll into my device management solution? Will all the applications install? Will it activate, and all the other things that I need it to do? So running through those two scenarios, I think, is a great start.
Absolutely. And how important is it that organizations do actually upgrade to the latest version of the operating system? Because we know how people dislike change.
It is something for people to consider, that there is this annual cadence where Apple every fall is going to introduce a new version of the operating system for both iPhone and iPad and Mac. So it is something we have to plan for, and we should expect to continue. And as part of that, Apple will support previous versions of the operating system for some time. It's generally an N-2 scenario where they'll support the current year and the previous 2 releases with security updates and patches and things like that. But it's always true that the most secure version of the operating system is going to be the latest. Yeah. That's where the most attention is happening. That's where the most testing is happening. That's where the focus is on introducing capabilities that make the overall platform not only, more efficient and more productive and sometimes more fun to use, but it's also where all the effort's going to make it more secure. And that is a really important consideration for corporate customers. If your job is not only to deploy devices, but to make sure that they are secure and they're configured correctly to protect the organization, then having a clear path to move your devices to the latest operating system is only going to be to your advantage.
Yeah, and I guess the predictable, regular, annual release of these operating systems as well makes it relatively straightforward to plan for.
Absolutely. There's really no getting around it.
Yeah, I was going to say there's almost no excuse anymore because, back, I don't know, maybe a couple decades ago, not only did there used to be a cost associated with upgrading, but it was also a lot more tedious when you had physical media that you had to put into a machine to upgrade it. Nowadays, not only
I got a lot of exercise doing that. Thank you very much. My department was over 4 floors. There was a lot of running around to do.
Oh, God. But not only is it now easier to just push these 2 devices remotely, but also it sort of seems like a lot of the changes in the operating systems are maybe a little more incremental. Like it's not as foundational as it used to be back when, OS 10 was really getting off the ground. So it seems like there's really no excuse not to just continue upgrading, right?
Yeah, I think so. We've certainly seen a shift among our customers towards adopting new releases very quickly. I mean, some of that I think we'll take some credit for, right? As part of the service that we provide, we put a lot of emphasis on making it easy to deploy the latest version of the OS and to manage that rollout quite easily using our tooling. But I also think that customers have recognized that this really is what they need to do. There are certain environments that are reluctant to adopt that approach. Video and audio production come to mind. They rely on a certain tool chain in order to do their job, and making any change within the whole workflow can sometimes disrupt it. And so, they kind of particularly like to, or it's one example of a scenario where they like to just kind of lock it in and not change it. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. But for really, I think the vast majority of users and corporate applications or corporate use of these kinds of devices, staying up to date with the latest releases really is the best way to ensure that you're providing a secure environment and a productive environment for the people that you work with.
So as we start to approach the end of the beta season, everybody has tested their apps and everything works great, we assume. How should IT admins think about the rollout phase? As long as everything's working, do we just push everything immediately? Is it more of a phased approach? Like, what are your opinions around that?
I'm not sure that there's a one size fits all approach to rolling out a new version of macOS. But I have seen a couple patterns that I think people could choose to adopt. So one is, a very aggressive approach where, day one on release day, as soon as it's out, the update is available to users. And so you could either go to self-service or go directly into software update in system settings and install it as soon as you like. A middle ground approach would be to give people a bit of warning and say, hey, this is available. We're going to enforce it in 30 to 60 days. So you can kind of choose your window in there and do it when you like. But we are going to set a deadline because we want to move everyone onto the new feature. The last option that you have is you can defer available updates for up to 90 days. So during that window, you can prevent people from updating early. But 90 days is the end of that limit. So it's not possible to defer the updates forever or upgrading to the new operating system version. You can't do that forever. If you have some hesitation about it, or there's some issues that you're aware of that need to be resolved, then within that scenario, what I would suggest is sort of a test, pilot, deploy phased approach. Go ahead and test with a small group, maybe even just the IT team or devices that you have under your control, or a set of users who are particularly helpful and engaged and involved and can work closely with your team to validate that you are ready to move forward. From there, though, you do need to have a pilot group that has covers a bit more of the organization, so that you're making sure that you're validating that things are working across multiple use cases and multiple different workflows. It's not helpful to only test with IT and never test anywhere else, because the marketing department, sales, engineering, they're going to have different tooling, different workflows that may not have shown up in your early tests. So have that pilot group, but make it diverse enough so that you've got good coverage across the different departments, the different types of users that you have. And they don't necessarily all need to be sophisticated users. They just need to be helpful and responsive when you ask them, how's it going? Is there any issues that you've encountered? And so on. It's quite useful to think about extending that pilot group to some people who you may not consider to be the most technical. They might provide you with some of the most important feedback, as long as you have those lines of communication open. Once you've gone through those two phases and you feel ready and you've validated that, yes, everything seems to be working, our applications are working fine, workflows seem to be going okay, now you can automate your deployment. And using a tool like Kandji or something else, right, will help you into making that deployment as fully automated as possible. So you don't have to run around like Victoria with a USB stick or a floppy like I used to at the Mac Lab.
I was going to say it was pre-USB stick days.
Well, right. I mean, I remember having a lab of Mac SEs where we'd just gotten hard drives, so you could actually boot the operating system without inserting a floppy into it. But yeah, instead of running around, right, you could push a button and all your devices get updated within the time frame that you're looking for. But just to go back and recap the answer here, I do think it's totally valid if you like and it's worked for you in the past to just tell your folks, hey, the new update is available. If you'd like to upgrade to the new version of macOS, go ahead and do so, right? We're ready for it. We've already tested and validated that it works, and we're ready on release day. I think that's a wonderful situation to be in. If you've got some issues where you're waiting for a vendor to be ready with their tools for that release, if you got some other issue where you need to defer a bit, then having tooling in place that allows you to automate that deployment when you are ready becomes critical.
Well, fingers crossed that everybody's OS upgrades this fall go smoothly then, and that if they take on board your advice, Weldon, I'm sure that they will. Looking forward to experiencing all of those new features, and it certainly sounds like Mac admins have got a lot more useful capabilities coming their way. So thank you very much for sharing your insights with us today.
And thank you for having me on.
Okay, so we covered a huge amount of ground in that conversation.
There's just so much to unpack because, again, there's so much work that needs to be done throughout that 3-month period. One of the things that really stood out to me when he talked about Declarative Device Management, or DDM, and how that's sort of shifting from traditional mobile device management, or MDM. A few years ago, I was managing some Macs for a company and using a mobile device management tool and trying to deploy something like, an employee needed an app and I would press the buttons to deploy that app. And I had no idea if it worked. And that was one of the most frustrating experiences because I like instant feedback. I want to know that it worked. And if I don't see it, I'm going to sit there and keep clicking buttons, and then I might break something because I don't really know what's going on.
When I was doing that, Scott, I just would walk around to their desk. Honestly, I think I was probably using a CD or a DVD to do the installation anyway. So
see, I would almost prefer that because when everyone's remote and you push the button, you don't know. But so now, with Kandji and Declarative Device Management, having that interface where the device can notify you of the status of things like that, I think that is just world shattering as far as I'm concerned. I think that's a really great update.
So clearly, developers have been doing a lot of work during this period. So I guess we need to break it down. What are the key things people need to do if they're preparing for these releases? So they're preparing for the new OS release. They got to make sure that they check this is going to work for them, haven't they?
Yeah, testing early, and also, like he mentioned, submitting feedback. That's probably the most important point. Like if you're working with these operating systems, whether you're testing deployment or whatever apps you use, your toolkit, if something doesn't work, making sure to notify Apple as soon as possible because they're constantly refining these betas.
You mean they're not going to know if I just sit here and grumble about it?
Exactly. And that has been a personal frustration because I follow a lot of people who kind of cover Apple. And during this 3-month period, I see so many posts on social media and, blog posts where people complain about things in the betas. And my favorite, one time I read someone said, I can't believe Apple would ship this. Well, they didn't ship it. They haven't shipped it. It's a beta. And so that's where letting them know as early as possible so that they can refine these betas, I think is just really, really important.
So you really need to test all of your critical applications and functions. You've got to have that test environment set up to do this. And then as you go through deployment, you've got to make sure you check in with those users that their devices, their applications, their access to corporate systems are working effectively, and get them to shout as soon as possible if there's a problem after deployment as well.
That really helps prepare you for the rollout phase, which we also touched on. Despite the amount of work that needs to be done, there's really no excuse not to work on adopting these new operating systems as they come out. So collecting as much data as possible, letting Apple know when things don't work, and then preparing for that rollout phase. And, whether you decide to just drop it on day one or do a phased rollout or even just delay it for a month or two, it is really important to just be ready and to go ahead and adopt the new updates.
Okay, so that's all for this episode. We'd like to thank Kandji for sponsoring this episode. I'd like to thank Weldon for his time and expertise. To find more episodes of We Got Your Mac and for other resources, you can visit wegotyourmac.com and make sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform so that you don't miss any of our upcoming episodes. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.